Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Andy. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm pastor here at Allendale, and I just want to welcome you into this space for this important evening. I'm so thankful for Dr. Bernard LaFayette Jr. and Dr. Ray Arsenault tonight for this important conversation. John Lewis has played an important role in Allendale becoming Allendale what we are. Some of you remember when our sign was vandalized. At the time, John Lewis's words were on our sign about good trouble. And I guess the person was just getting into some good trouble to vandalize our sign. But this community, when I arrived 8 years ago, wanted to make sure that everyone that came into this space knew they were welcome. And so they want to make sure you know that no matter your race, ethnicity, economic situation, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, background or belief, age or condition of ableness, whether single or partnered, you are welcome here. Now, most importantly, the restrooms, there's a women's restroom over there, men's restroom on that side, and then gender-inclusive restrooms back through the hallway. Welcome and thank you, a big thank you to League of Women Voters who provided our refreshments tonight, and of course our hosts, Tombolo Books.
Hi everyone, thank you all so much for being here. My name is Kelsey Jagno. I have the very, very great pleasure of being the events coordinator at Tombolo Books and welcoming you here this evening. I am absolutely honored to be here with all of you and to be in the presence of such extraordinary historians and activists. I would like to take a moment and say a massive thank you to Allendale United Methodist Church for hosting us in this gorgeous space. Thank you, Pastor Andy and Cameron, for all of your hard work. And of course, to the League of Women Voters, again, for providing the food. And for both of these organizations to just be incredible community partners. It's really at the heart of Tombolo's mission to be partnered with community organizations like Allendale and the League of Women Voters. It's at the heart of our mission, and it's our privilege to be partnered with these community members. And holding space for community, I think, is a very apropos topic for tonight. For this event. And Dr. Ray Arsenault has written this gorgeous biography of John Lewis, and John Lewis and activists like Dr. Bernard LaFayette put community and liberation at the center of their missions. And we at Tombolo just feel like those are two pillars that are so necessary to center in our work as booksellers, in our work as voters, and in our work as community members here in St. Pete. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our very distinguished speakers. Dr. Bernard LaFayette Jr. has been a civil rights movement activist, minister, educator, lecturer, and is an authority on strategy on nonviolent social change. He co-founded the Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee in 1960. He was a leader of the Nashville movement. I know, please, yes. He was a leader of the Nashville movement, 1960, and on the Freedom Rides in 1961 and the 1965 Selma movement. He directed the Alabama Voter Registration Project in 1962, and he was appointed National Program Administrator for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and National Coordinator of the 1968 Poor People's Campaign by Martin Luther King Jr. In addition, Dr. LaFayette has served as Director of Peace and Justice in Latin America, Chairperson of the Consortium on Peace Research, Education and Development, Director of the Push Excel Institute, and Minister of the Westminster Presbyterian Church in Tuskegee, Alabama. Please welcome Dr. Bernard LaFayette. course, we have Dr. Raymond Arsenault, who is the John Hope Franklin Professor of Southern History Emeritus at the University of South Florida. He is the author of several award-winning books on civil rights history, including Freedom Riders 1961 and The Struggle for Racial Justice, The Sound of Freedom, Marian Anderson, The Lincoln Memorial, and The Concert That Awakened America, and author Ash Alike, and of course, In Search of Beloved Community, by the biography of John Lewis. Dr. Ray Arsenault, everyone.
I'm not sure if this mic is working. Is it? Oh, it is. Wow. I'm sort of a techno peasant, so I'm always so shocked when it works. But I really want to welcome all of you tonight. I see so many friends, and it's really wonderful that you came out. And last night, I was in Brookline, Massachusetts, speaking at a synagogue. And the rabbi was my first protege. The first year I started teaching at the University of Minnesota. And he's now the rabbi at this synagogue, which was Leonard Bernstein's synagogue. I thought that was kind of cool. Some of you probably saw Maestro in recent days. And it was a huge crowd there. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience, considering all that's been happening with anti-Semitism. And they were really very interested in John Lewis, who, by the way, was a great Philo-Semite. He talks in his autobiography, Walking with the Wind, which I highly recommend to you, about growing up in this little community near Troy, Alabama, and there were several Jewish merchants in town who were kind to him, and he didn't know many whites growing up. He lived 10 miles out in an area where there was no electricity, no running water, no paved roads. You know, his family were sharecroppers, and he thought of Jews as the people of the book. And he remarks in his memoir that when he heard white supremacists use the word Jew in a kind of derisive way, he thought it reminded him of the same way they would use the N-word about African Americans, and so he always sympathized with the Jews. And so it was a really great feeling there last night. And but I'm really excited about tonight to have Bernard here. We've become close friends over the years, and if you can't have John Lewis here tonight, this is the next best thing, let me tell you. Because Bernard knew John for over 60 years. They were roommates, both at American Baptist Theological Seminary and at Fisk, and were close collaborators really their whole lives. And you know, when I started to write this book in December, I guess it was 2018 or 19, almost immediately John was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in December of 2019, and I just didn't feel right about bothering him. I mean, I knew enough what was going on, even though he always said when the press asked him, he said, "I'm doing fine." You know, the poor guy was practically on his deathbed, and he'd still smile and be optimistic. So I really didn't get to do those final interviews. I mean, I'd talked to him many times, and Bernard very graciously stepped in and answered endless questions that I had to try to fill in the gaps. And I really couldn't have written the book without Bernard, so I want to thank him here publicly. What we're going to try to do tonight is a bit of an experiment, and kind of a back and forth. I'm going to sort of interview him, and he can interview me if he wants to. But it's an experiment that's complicated a little bit by Bernard's background. I mean, he is, after all, a former preacher, and he's a professional orator, and he's accustomed to delivering long sermons. Okay, I've got to warn you. Yeah. If you think historians talk a lot, wait till you hear Bernard. No. reminds me of one of the first stories he ever told me about his life. And he was brought up a Baptist, right? But after he got his divinity degree and was ordained, his first church was a Presbyterian church. And so he meets with, I guess, the head of the deacons or the elders, and Bernard had to say, look, I'm a Baptist, and you'll probably find that we're accustomed to spending more time in church than Presbyterians. We have long sermons. It practically goes through all Sunday, and so will that be okay? And the head elder said, oh, sure, you can talk as long as you want, but we leave at noon. And I always loved that story. And so anyway, let me just preface my questions to Bernard with tell you a little bit about how I came to write this book. Early in my career, I wrote about what I now call sort of the bad guys, Southern demagogues. In fact, my friends used to joke that I was the world's only demagographer. So many demagogues, so little time, right? So my first book was about a demagogue from Arkansas named Jeff Davis, not the original Jefferson Davis, but Jeff Davis. He was a governor and a senator, and he was known as the Karl Marx of the hillbillies, and also the wild ass of the Ozarks, which I used that for the title of my book, thinking I would sell more books. It didn't work, but so in those early years, I was sort of known for that, for studying Southern demagogues. And at some point, as an undergraduate, as a research assistant, I had specialized in civil rights history and Southern political history. And I always knew that sooner or later I wanted to focus on civil rights, but I really made a conscious decision that the best thing I could do with my career was to try to recover these stories of, well, frankly, of heroism, of courage, of people who really made a difference. And so I did a book on freedom riders, which to that point had been sort of ignored. 1961, the black and white kids who got on those buses and dared the Klan to stop them from sitting in the front of the bus or getting a cup of coffee at the white lunch counter. And, many of them made out their last will and testament before they got on those buses because they knew they might not come back. And that was a life-changing experience for me. I got to meet Bernard in 2001. I met John Lewis in 2000, and sort of became an honorary freedom rider. They were very, very gracious and kind to me, and I spent a lot of time with them at freedom rider reunions, and I was always, writing down furiously when I was with them for years. And when I would lead civil rights tours in the South, they would go on the bus with me, usually 2 or 3 of them, sometimes 10, as many as 10. And so just coming to grips with the freedom riders, what they did, those young kids who had the courage to demand not freedom later, but freedom now. And so in the context of the time, they were unreasonable. As you'll see, Bernard's a very unreasonable guy. He really wants freedom and equity, and he'll do just about anything to get it, as long as it's nonviolent. So early on, I realized that the Freedom Rides book was more than a book, really. It was more than a book to me, anyway. I felt a tremendous responsibility because it was the first book ever written on the Freedom Rides, and I had to track them all down, which is how I became close to John Lewis, because he was trying to organize the 40th reunion, and the Freedom Riders were scattered all over the place, and I had spent over a year finding all these addresses and phone numbers and tracking them down, so I helped him organize these reunions, and he invited me to be part of the reunions, and it was a wonderful experience, really. I never gotten over it. And that started a series of books. I did the Freedom Riders, and of course, some of you may know it was made into an American Experience documentary by Stanley Nelson, which to this point has been seen by more than 60 million people. When you're, it's incredible. Normally, a historian, if you sell 500 copies, you're lucky, if your mother buys it, you're lucky, I had a huge influence, I think, through that film. We won 3 Emmys and a Peabody, and I was very fortunate to hook up with Stanley to do that film. And then I did the book of Marian Anderson, and her battle with the DAR in 1939, trying to sing at the Constitution Hall, and ultimately, as you probably know, on Easter Sunday, she sang at the Lincoln Memorial. I was the first big gathering at the memorial, long before Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech and all of that. And 75,000 people showed up. Black and white was one of the first kind of glimpses of what America could be, that crowd that day, and made her, of course, an iconic figure. And she lived on until 1993, at the age of 96, and was an extraordinary person. And then I did Arthur Ashe, which got me lots of trips to the U.S. Open and the French Open, and I'm very thankful for that. But he was also an extraordinary human being and a humanitarian. And so I've had a bit of a difficulty in that the last few books that I've written are about people who don't really have an edge. If you were writing fiction, you'd want a kind of creative tension. You want these people to be troubled or marred or in some way complicated and complex, and they were that, but they all had kind of the saint problem, right? They're kind of secular saints in a way. I really tried very hard in the John Lewis book and the other books to give a balanced perspective, to not try to hide anything, not to glorify them any more than I had to, but frankly, it was hard to find. We always say, you're going to get the story warts and all. Well, there weren't very many warts on these people, I got to tell you. Even though, as I think Bernard will tell you, John Lewis was controversial within the movement because he was so utterly, deeply committed to nonviolence, to the search for the beloved community. And he never wavered. He wouldn't let anybody to deter him. And of course, when Black Power emerged and Black nationalism and people criticizing interracial coalitions and criticizing nonviolence, he was sort of in the way, And in 1966, after 3 years as the chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, he was basically thrown out and replaced by Stokely Carmichael. And then the next year, H. Rap Brown, who was even more oriented towards a kind of really against nonviolence. And in fact, I don't know if this has become a national story or not, but just before I went on to speak last night at the synagogue, a friend of mine came up and said, "Did you see the Boston Globe today?" And the front page story was about these two, essentially, I guess they're pro-Palestinian groups. I'm not sure they were actually pro-Hamas, but they were militant in some sense, and they had recycled a SNCC cartoon from 1967, a really ugly anti-Semitic cartoon. But of course, John Lewis was long gone by then. He had nothing to do with that, and I bitterly condemned it. But I'm glad they told me, because most people in the audience knew about this cartoon, which had an Arabic figure and an African-American figure both being hanged. And there's a Star of David above them with a swastika in the middle of it. And it's a pretty ugly thing. And but that's when SNCC was disintegrating. It wasn't the SNCC that Bernard helped create in 1960, or that was so heroic for so many years and had such an enormous influence on the movement. But let me just say before I ask Bernard some questions, I can say, I think unequivocally, that John Lewis is the most extraordinary person that I met in my lifetime. I was telling the crowd last night that nobody could make me feel more guilty than John Lewis, because I always felt I could never do enough. I could never live up to this example that he set, you know. In particular, one of the great tenets of the beloved community, which is a term that goes way back to Josiah Royce, the Christian philosopher in 1913, and Martin Luther King used it, of course Gandhi used it, Howard Thurman, many of the kind of great, the Fellowship of Reconciliation, the main pacifist organization in the world. You know, I just so enamored of his ideas and his depth of character, and I tried to communicate that in the book. But the one thing that always troubled me is that one of the precepts of beloved community, and Dr. King emphasized this, and so did John, was you've got to love your enemies as much as you love your friends. And I think that's not easy. And I suspect many of you in the room over the last few years with Trumpism and all that we face, it's easy to lose your cool, right? To say hateful things, to get angry, to lose your balance, and not to love your enemies. And so maybe we need to hear that more than ever, but it's probably more difficult than ever, considering the situation that many of us find ourselves in. But that's who John Lewis was. You know, I mean, he really believed that. There's one story. In 1968, John was working in the Bobby Kennedy campaign. In April of '68, of course, that's the month that Dr. King was assassinated. In fact, the night that John was helping Bobby Kennedy with a rally in the black section of Indianapolis, most of the crowd didn't know, but he got word that King had been assassinated in Memphis. And it was devastating for John Lewis, as it was devastating for so many people. But Bobby Kennedy probably gave the best speech of his life that night. And Indianapolis turned out to be one of the few cities in the United States, large cities, that did not go up in flames that night. He sort of convinced the people just to go home, and you can grieve, but don't burn up your own city. But John was devastated, and maybe even more devastated 2 months later when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. You know, but there was a white journalist, liberal journalist, progressive, named Fred Powledge, who was interviewing John that night, and when news came that Dr. King was assassinated, Fred Powledge just sort of went crazy, and he turns to John Lewis and he says, why is it that we're always the ones who are getting assassinated? You know, sort of people who are progressive, who are fighting for justice and freedom. Maybe we should put a bullet in one of their heads sometime, you know? And of course, John Lewis immediately, even though I'm sure he was grieving terribly and maybe deep in his brain felt a little bit of that, but he said, get that out of here. The world does not need any more hate. And he really chastened Fred Powledge for saying that. And I always thought that in some ways that's the quintessential John Lewis, that he always seemed to keep his head. You know, he never lost it. You know, he could have that night, he could have said, yeah, that's right, but he didn't. Even in that moment of stress and disappointment and grief, you know, he stood up for nonviolence. And so for him, it was not a tactic or a strategy, it was a way of life. It informed everything he did. And you know, he was not just a leader of the civil rights movement. He just didn't want, you know, equal rights. He wanted a kind of revolution in the human heart. He was very Gandhian in that sense. And I should say, turning to Bernard, he was known in the movement as Little Gandhi. Okay, I always loved that. And he's not as little as he used to be, but but he's still Gandhian. That's for sure. So, Bernard, could you maybe take us back to when you first met John? And if you can think back when you were, you know, 17, 18 years old, I guess, in college, Did you have any inkling of what he was going to become, or was he different then, or was he just another kid, another student with you?
Well, before we get started, I just want to say that it is such a privilege to be here with Ray. I mean, it's beyond description in terms of what he's been able to do with capturing the movement, and not just the individuals, but the movement in terms of the important decisions that were being made during that period, and the people who participated in making those kind of decisions. You know, we're only here for a short period of time, you know. Geez whiz, you know, and the older I get, you know, the shorter that is. But I have to learn to appreciate the past. And I want to say that when we think about what Ray has been able to produce and preserve, that's the thing. He's been able to preserve it, and I just am, you know, feel really honored to know him. And, well, to be honest with you, we almost feel like family, you know, in that sense. And I'm a native of Tampa, Florida. I was born in Ybor City, okay? Yeah, right there at 8th Avenue and 13th Street, right on that corner, big across from the Cuban cigar company. I can tell you a lot of stories about the cigars and stuff like that. You don't have a Tampa and Garcia Vega and all that kind of stuff. So I grew up in Tampa, and have someone here at home and to be able to capture these things. Before I go any further, I wanted to introduce my wife, who's with me here, Kate LaFayette from Tuskegee, Alabama. Okay. Yeah. And she was involved in the Poor People's Campaign. In fact, she is the one that developed the Coretta Scott Daycare Center, because that's her area, working with children and that sort of thing. And she's done a wonderful job. And also has traveled all over the world with me doing nonviolence training of people. And I don't want to spend that time telling you all the different countries we've been to. And I just feel, but the most important thing that I like to emphasize is that how many of you have heard of Booker T. Washington? Her father was Booker T. Washington's office boy. Yeah. Really helped Booker T, you know, accomplish a lot of things. And even after Booker T. Washington is gone, okay? And sitting next to her is my sister, Rosia Kennedy, and she's here in Tampa, Florida. And she's continued to do just tremendous work in terms of making things better for people in the community and that kind of thing. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that and appreciate it. John Lewis, well, I finished Milton Senior High School in Tampa, and I was the editor of the newspaper, of a high school newspaper, yeah. And in fact, in 1958, for those of you who like to do research, our newspaper won first place in the state of Florida. Yeah. And I was the editor of that paper. And what happened is that Florida A&M would give any of the, African-American students who finished, their paper was the first one in the state of Florida, won first place, you would get a full scholarship, 4-year scholarship in journalism at Florida A&M. So I was very excited about that. And my grandmother said, "You can't go." She finished the 3rd grade, my grandmother. Yeah, my great-grandmother was the fat lady in the fair. Yeah, May Lou. Yeah, there are pictures of her all over the place. She's Native American background. But anyway, my grandmother said, "No, boy, you're not going to be no journalist, okay? You're going to be a preacher, because I see the mark in your forehead." And the only thing I could see when I looked in the mirror was the place where I had the chicken pox. I used to stay in the mirror looking for this mark in my forehead. I didn't get that. So anyway, my grandmother went out and did some research and found a college in Nashville. Yeah, American Baptist Theological Seminary. Okay? And she's the one. 3rd grader now. She's the one that got me there in Nashville. Instead of being able to, and I was a work scholarship, okay? And so I said, okay, if I have to go, I go. So I had gone up to Florida A&M, and they were very excited about my coming there, but my grandmother said no. So I had to go to American Baptist Theological Seminary in Nashville. So I got confused because I went up there 2 weeks before school started, because I got mixed up with Florida A&M, the schedule. And so I went up there, and school hadn't even opened. So I became the janitor of the 2nd floor, and I cut grass, and so I love collard greens and pot liquor. That's the juice off the pot liquor there. And so I worked at the college before it even opened. And so I got the best room on campus. Yeah. So when John Lewis showed up 2 weeks later, I already had a huge room, and you have, 2 in a room or whatever. And so that's how he got to be my roommate. And besides, he was a year ahead of me in school. So I had an advantage of having a roommate who had already taken all the courses I was going to take. Yeah. So that was a real, plus for me. And so that's how we got to be roommates, okay? And I didn't have to buy any books, because he already had those books. What is he going to do with them now? Okay. And when I left to go, I was 2 weeks early when at the church, New Hope Baptist Church there, they sent me off, the members of the church. They gave me gifts to go to college. And guess what they gave me? They gave me food, cans of sardines and sausages and all that kind of stuff, etc. But that's just what I needed. Because I had 2 weeks, and the cafeteria wasn't even open. So God works in mysterious ways. Wonders to perform. Okay. So I had that advantage. Now, John Lewis was also the president of his class. Okay? Yeah, he already had leadership. So that was a thing that really attracted me, and I followed behind him. So now here's the thing that I want to put together, Ray, is that the whole idea of theology and studying, the basic scripture and that sort of thing, et cetera, gives you the foundation for nonviolence. And by going to the seminary when I did, and it was an opportunity to learn about nonviolence and being able to put that together, because that's the foundation for love one another, even those who might not be nice to you and treat you, the way you should be treated, that somehow you have the ability to bring about change when you represent that change that you want to see. And others, will be able to understand, like Ray was saying, that there's an alternative to violence, that you don't go and just imitate what you have. So that foundation, theological foundation, was a thing that helped you to be arrested by nonviolence. Yes. And so you become a part of it. But John Lewis was very much committed, because we took classes with Jim Lawson. James Lawson Jr., he was teaching nonviolence because Martin Luther King had invited him to come to, South, so he could teach the nonviolence that he had learned from, in India and other places. So that John Lewis kept telling me about coming to these workshops. I say, workshops? I'm already working, man. Don't need any more jobs. I was working in the kitchen, so I can get me some collard greens and bottled liquor. And guess what? I was the librarian, assistant librarian. Okay? So, and the librarian became pregnant and had some difficulty the first year I was there, so I had to sleep most of the time in the library because I was the assistant librarian. So I was assistant librarian, janitor of the second floor, and, volunteer pot washer in the kitchen. So I had plenty of jobs, so I was used to doing a lot of jobs anyway, so that was fine with me. Because I used to work for Blue Ribbon grocery store here in Tampa, Florida, okay? And they put me into different kind of jobs all over the place. And so, in fact, it was the Jewish people who taught me how to drive a truck. I used to drive a truck at age 14. Yeah. But I am not going to go through that right now. We're going to talk about John Lewis. Now, John was very smart, and he had the ability to not only recite what he read in books, but he had the ability to interpret what he read and be able to put things together. And he kept telling me about coming to these workshops. So I went to the workshop so I wouldn't have to hear his mouth anymore. So when I got there, I got caught up in it with John Lewis, and that's how we did it. So John actually was a leader because he was president of his class. He ended up being president of the student body at American Baptist College. So leadership ability was something that was not, uncommon to him. And I just want to tell you this little story about Stokely Carmichael and his dealing with SNCC, okay? It's the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So when you're no longer a student, then, because it's a student organization, then that means that, you've already, served your term. So Stokely came up with a bright idea. It was at Fisk University where we were having our SNCC meeting. And Stokely said that what happened is that you can vote for who's going to be the head of SNCC. And you can, the first go around, you can vote for the first 4 people that you would want, any of those 4. Limit, just 4. The next go around, you vote for 3. And then the next go around, you vote for 2. And the next go around, you vote for 1. So it's through elimination that you end up with the leader. And when I found out that's what he wanted to do, I agreed with it and supported that idea. So I told all the people who I was influencing, vote for 1 every time. And that's how John Lewis got to be head of SNCC, okay? One more time, okay?
Very sneaky.
Yeah. Well, and Stokely saw what was going on. He said, no, you got to vote for 3 people. I said, you can't tell anybody they got to vote for somebody they don't want to vote for. No. So he couldn't argue with me. So that's how John Lewis got to be head of SNCC as long as he was. Now, he is the one that influenced me to go on the freedom rides because, technically speaking, we, after we finished the sit-ins in Nashville, we had desegregated the movie theaters in Nashville. Yes, and we desegregated the Greyhound bus station, all in 1960. So we didn't just stay with the other thing. You know how we desegregated the Greyhound bus station? We had sit-ins at the bus station itself. And and the reason we had that is because when we decided that we were going to go to the bus station, the manager said, well, no, we don't discriminate against people, you can come in, no problem. And they claimed that they had desegregated the bus station, and guess what they were doing? Older black women who would go and try to go through the front entrance of the bus station, they would send them around through the alley, and they had to go and eat at a porcelain table in the kitchen. They wouldn't even let them go through the front door. And, that really upset me because I love my grandmother, okay? So I said, okay, I'm going to go and talk to the manager. You know what the manager said? Oh, no, we don't discriminate against people. We don't do. I said, look, man, don't play with me. We've lost a lot of time already out of our classes and everything, sitting in and going to jail and all that kind of stuff and being beaten. Don't play with me. I said, you see that boy sitting over there on that stool? He's the one that told me, and this was a white fella, a white student. He said, he told me, okay, that you were doing this. We had an all-night sit-in at the bus station. the manager closed, and I got John Lewis to go with me, and Jim Bevel and Diane Nash and all of them. And you know what? When we went in there, he turned out the lights and locked the doors. The Greyhound bus station. And when he did that, we decided to stay all night. Yeah, because we carried our books with us. And what happened is that about 5:30 the next morning, I got up from the bus station stool and said, okay, I got to go now, so let me, and so it was bad for you to go. So they opened the door and let me out and everything. And when I got out there, the phone booth was in the parking lot. Some cab drivers who'd been out there all night long, you know, because they get coffee and everything waiting on the drivers, came and kicked the door in and put a headlock on me and pulled me out of that phone booth with the folding doors. And then they threw me down on the ground, okay, the concrete, you know, parking lot, and kicked me in the face. So I got back up, and they didn't know what to do, because what they did didn't work. And I looked at them, and I said, excuse me, I need to finish making my phone call. Okay, because I didn't respond to them at all. I just accepted that response, and I showed my concern for them. Okay. Police came and arrested me, pulled me out of there, and two of them. And the younger one, as we were going to the paddy wagon, say, well, what are we going to charge him with? And the older one says, charge him with fighting. That's what he was going to be charged with, what he was doing, fighting. And so we walked a few more steps. Then the young one, you know, said, well, who are we going to say he was fighting with? And the old one looked at him and said, go get one of those. And they went and got one of the white cab drivers. And they put handcuffs on him and on me, and they threw me in the paddy wagon first, and then they threw him in there, and he balled up in the corner, all scared. I said, listen, man, relax. I'm the same on the inside as I am on the outside. And I had a double meaning, okay? Yeah, same. So we got down, and we put up his bond. We put up his bond when he got down there, et cetera. But anyway, we desegregated lunch counters, at the bus station. And John Lewis and I desegregated for the first time that bus. Before the Freedom Ride started, we desegregated the Greyhound bus going down. In fact, Barack Obama mentioned that in the eulogy. Yeah, but I'll stop at this point.
Yeah, I just could pick up on what you were saying about the violence, and it reminds me of maybe my favorite John Lewis story is when the 50th anniversary of the Freedom Rides in 2011, the Stanley Nelson film, Oprah saw it, and she apparently didn't know much about the Freedom Rides, even though her father was a barber in Nashville, and his clients were often ex-Freedom Riders. But she somehow, she was a busy woman, I guess, becoming famous and rich, and but she was moved by the film, and she called 15 minutes after she saw it. They gave her, a DVD, I guess, and she's sobbing into the phone to Stanley Nelson, saying, "I've only got 4 shows left." She was ending her, Oprah show. I've got to do one on the Freedom Riders, and sure enough, she did. She flew 180 Freedom Riders and their families in at her expense, completely filled the Harpo studio, and this was on the 50th anniversary, and I met with the producers the night before, and we talked earlier, and Oprah thought, well, maybe the Freedom Rides, even though they successfully desegregated the bus stations and the buses, and it was the first kind of non-ambiguous victory, really, for the civil rights movement in 1961 and 62, but they were afraid it was kind of dark, and so they wanted a reconciliation story. And they said, can you find a reformed Klansman for us, so we can interview? And for once, I could deliver. I said, well, yes, we have one for you. And his name was Elwyn Wilson. And he was from Rock Hill, South Carolina. Those of you who have been there know it's a pretty tough town, mill town, big Klan. And Mr. Wilson was sort of a Klansman in training. He was 24 years old when the Freedom Ride came in. And he was basically a part of this group of thugs who attacked 3 of the Freedom Riders. And one of them was John, and he was beaten pretty badly. That's the first time he had one of those. You may have seen pictures of him with the bandages all over his head. He was ultimately beaten more than 40 times. And several fractured skulls. He was imprisoned 45 times, including 5 times when he was in Congress. That tells you something, right? He was always getting arrested in front of the South African embassy fighting apartheid, or the Sudanese embassy when he was fighting for the genocide in Darfur. And he was involved in every cause you can imagine. It wasn't just race. He was an early environmentalist. He was LBGQ, same-sex marriage, way before anybody else, really. It was incredible. But back to the Oprah show. So Mr. Wilson comes on, and he, 2 years before, when Barack Obama was inaugurated for the first time in 2009, you may remember if you watched it on television, maybe some of you saw it live, John Lewis was sitting right behind Obama when he took the oath of office. You could see him clearly, and Mr. Wilson saw him, and he'd felt guilty for years. He left the Klan, he got religion, he got his life together, he got married, he had children, he became a fairly decent person, I think, and he always felt guilty about what he'd done to John Lewis back in 1961. So on a whim, he calls John in his office, and he's sobbing over the phone. I'm so sorry. I can't believe what I did to you. I've always wanted to apologize. And so they're praying together over the phone, crying together. And I think with most people, that would have been the end of it, but not for John Lewis. So he flies him up to Washington at his expense and meets with him. I said this last night in a synagogue. I said they had a come to Jesus meeting. And I said maybe I should rephrase that. But that's what they had, and became friends. So when Oprah producers wanted this reconciliation story, we had it for them. But poor Mr. Wilson was now elderly. He was bad health. He died about 1.5 years after he was on the show. And you have to get the picture here. So I'm sitting here, and John's like right there. I'm off camera, and there's Mr. Wilson on the other side, so I can see what's going on. And you can see he was just terrified. There are probably 10 million people watching, 180 Freedom Riders all around him. I mean, he probably didn't know they were into forgiveness, And so Oprah asked the first question, and nothing. You could see he just froze. And she tried again, and you could see he was about to bolt from the stage. He was terrified, you could see. And so John reaches out with his left hand, and he grasps Mr. Wilson's hand. You remember that? You were there. And he pulls it up a little bit, and he says, "He's my brother."
Yeah.
I don't think there was a dry eye in the studio, and it was such an act of compassion and generosity, and I'll never forget it, really. I mean, to me, that's who John Lewis really was, that he instinctively knew the right thing to do, you know, in that situation. And again, that's part of the notion of, I mean, I think he really was able to love his enemies as much as he loved his friends. You know, he just had this capacity for compassion and looking at the world through other people's eyes. You know, he just was able to do it. But again, he suffered a tremendous amount of violence in his life, and the only time he told me he ever he didn't really commit violence, but it was in Selma. Remember when Dr. King checked into the hotel, but previously all-white hotel. No black had ever stayed there before. And this white supremacist guy comes up and starts punching Dr. King in the face, really trying to hurt him. And John Lewis is standing right next to him. And so John was short, but he was strong and kind of burly, and he grabs the guy and kind of a bear hug around him and stops him from attacking Dr. King. And then they carted him away, and King was okay, but John, in some ways, felt that's the closest, he said, that's the closest I ever came to violence. I don't know what came over me. You know? He sort of felt guilty about it. I mean, he sort of knew that was the right thing to do, right? But he just, I don't know about you, Bernard. I never heard him raise his voice in anger. You know, he had plenty to be angry about, but and in conversation he was quiet. There was kind of a shyness to him, I thought. You know, he could have a booming oratorical voice, right? I'm sure you've all heard it, but he was kind of mellow and calm and just sort of communicated this sense of peace, because he was on a journey. You know, he was on this search for the beloved community, and he was not going to let anybody deter him from trying to make the world a better place as he saw it. I don't know if you have any thoughts.
And even on the Freedom Rides, you know, when we left Birmingham and went to Montgomery, and it was one of these situations where when we left Birmingham and we got to the city limits of Montgomery, everything got quiet. This was a Saturday morning, and no one was in the streets. Now, we knew something was wrong. So I got up, and I told the bus driver, you know, I talked to the Freedom Riders, and I said, I want everybody to get a partner and stick with that partner no matter what happens. Nobody will be left alone. You got one person going to be with you no matter what happens. The bus driver told me, he said, sit down and shut up. And I used to be a little skinny fella. So I told the bus driver, I said, no, this wasn't the bus driver. This was the National Guard, the Alabama Guard. And so I said, you're in charge of the troops. I'm in charge of the Freedom Riders. So he got, you know, not used to having a little old black fella telling him what he's in charge of, you know what I mean? So he didn't say anything. When we got to the bus station and we got off the bus, the rides were not there. There was only one ride. There was one black cab driver. And when the things got to really looking pretty tough, and I'll give you the short of it, that the mob came out of the bus station and started beating up the reporters. Ignored the Freedom Riders, because they wanted to get the reporters and the cameramen and all those people first so they can wipe them out, so they wouldn't be able to record anything. And I knew we were going to be next. So I tried to get some of the women in this one cab, because, you know, the other cab who was supposed to be there weren't there. And when they got in that cab, that black cab driver jumped out of his cab, and he was shaking like a leaf. He was a tall black fellow, you know, and he was scared as he could be. I said, "What's the matter, man? Get back in the cab and get these people out of here." Because to be honest with you, I got a whole bunch of sisters and stuff, you know, I'm used to taking care of women. So since they had one cab, we'd tell all the women to get in the cab. And he wouldn't drive the white girls. No.
Well, remember, one of the Black Freedom Riders said, "Move over," and she took the wheel.
Yeah, right, yeah. Yeah, Catherine Birch, right? Yeah. But anyway, that's when John Lewis was hit in the head. When they finished beating up the reporters and all those people, then the mob turned around and came after us. And they hit John Lewis in the head with a Coca-Cola crate. And that metal part of that Coca-Cola crate was the thing that put a hole in his head. Yeah. Then they turned around and got Jim Zwerg and knocked him over a rail and knocked all his teeth out and everything. And he was knocked unconscious the first lick. He didn't realize that they picked him up and knocked him over 5 times over that same rail. And then when
he
they
was a white
finished that,
freedom rider.
White freedom rider, right?
They thought he was, you know, a traitor to the white race, so they went after him more than even to the black.
Yeah, they knocked all of his
You know,
teeth
Bernard,
out.
I think we've got to turn it out to questions now. And,
Okay. Yeah.
You know, they leave at noon. You know. So.
Okay.
So I think there are a couple of mics that anybody would like to ask a question. We got some time.
This is something I started wondering with the death of Alexei Navalny, who went back to Russia to certain death, and I wondered what allows people like Dr. Lafayette and the other freedom riders, and you talked about John Lewis 40 times beaten up. What trait is it allows you to walk toward the danger when every instinct is to walk away?
Well, maybe I could say, I'm sure Bernard could give you much more depth on this, but when they were in those workshops with Jim Lawson, one of the things that he stressed was the Gandhian principle of unmerited suffering, in a sense that it's really a kind of a belief that you almost have to have unmerited suffering to make this kind of transition to where you take yourself outside of yourself, where you can fight for a cause beyond yourself. And this is what happened when Bernard and the others were put in prison in Mississippi, in Parchman. Both the Kennedy administration and the white supremacist politicians in Mississippi thought that they could if they put the Freedom Riders in a real prison, you know, that they go running home to their mothers and fathers, you know. But they didn't. They turned Parchman Prison into kind of a university of nonviolence. And the more the guards went after them, the more people like Bernard, particularly Bernard, which keeps singing the freedom songs, driving them crazy all night, singing these freedom songs. And the guards would say, "Who are these people? We've never seen kids like this. They don't respond to the normal forms of intimidation." And part of that is that notion of unmerited suffering, that they sort of toughened them, made them the shock troops of the movement. And so for the rest of the decade, it's those freedom riders who went through this experience. There was no turning back for them. I mean, they kind of got their stripes in a sense, like they were kind of nonviolent warriors. It hardened them in a sense of their commitment. The more you beat them up, the tougher they got. Sometimes when I was researching this, I almost felt sorry for the white supremacists. They didn't know what they were dealing with these kids, you know. They had no chance to a movement that really believed in kind of prophetic religion and Gandhianism, and it was so beyond what the guards were used to. It just they didn't have a chance against people like Bernard. It really didn't. Right?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, since we were students and we were, we had classes that we were missing, that kind of thing, etc., we decided that we would turn the prison into a college. And we got students who were majors, in different subjects, and we got them to give lectures during the day, And then we even got the clowns at night who entertained us, okay? And they sang songs and they told jokes and all that kind of thing. So we ordered our own day. In fact, we had ultimate discipline to the extent that even when they had letters that were coming in to us. Now, the reason why we stayed in jail is because after we got convicted, we had 40 days to put up an appeal bond. Okay? Otherwise, you have to serve the term out if you didn't put up the bail. So what we did was used up the 40 days. We had 39 days. Okay? So that's how we filled the jails. So that's why we did, because otherwise we could just go on and get out our bond, and then the jails would be empty or whatever, et cetera, that you wouldn't. So we used the jail as a power base for our change. And guess what happened? The county jail had a warden. The night warden used to sit there and watch television, black and white television, with a coat hanger, as his antenna, okay? And then he sent the trustee out. The trustee is an inmate you can send out and trust him to come back. So he would send him out to get ice cream. Well, he'd sit there and watch television, and guess what happened? We started singing and entertaining him. So he forgot about the television and started coming down the hall, listening to us singing. And we put his name in the song. Yeah. And we just, took over the situation. Now, guess what happened? And this was the only group that had this situation. He sent the trustees out to get ice cream and put the ice cream, little pints of ice cream, in the mop bucket and rolled it right down to our cell block. And we had ice cream at night in Mississippi jail. And he also had a daughter who was in the 11th grade, and nobody in his family had gone to college. And we told him how to send off for the application and the financial aid and all that, and got his daughter, okay, accepted, to get enrolled in college.
So
and he sat there.
Hope, right?
And then when we got shipped out to the state prison, because this was the county jail, okay? When we got to the state prison, as we were leaving to get into the paddy wagons and all that, he was standing there by the steps. And you know what he said? Y'all come back to see me here.
Other questions?
Okay. Thanks for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. We're in a huge civil rights backlash right now. Very scary times. We're looking for action, and where can we go to learn to accept our enemies? Is there an organization such as this church, but something that we can give our community to say, hey, look, we can accept the other person in our as we go forward. I mean, we don't have to like them, but we can bring them together. is what I'm trying to say. Is there something moving forward that we can do now? Sorry.
Yes, we have groups all over the country as well as abroad where we train people in nonviolence, okay, social change. And we train people so that they can train others. So we have this in Detroit, we have it in Atlanta, we have it in, you just go down the list, different places, and we have it abroad as well. And this is something that I do as chairman of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the group that Martin Luther King, organized. So, and that's what we do. So if people who are interested in that, that's quite possible. And he knows many more people who do the training in different places. And so, and the transformation that can take place is tremendous. We can stop this violence. We don't have to live with this kind of situation that we are faced with now, all of the guns and stuff like that, et cetera. We were able to stop I'm talking about countries. We were involved in helping Mandela get elected because did you know they had black folks from different tribes shooting each other when they were trying to register to vote? Yeah. Buddha Lacey and his group, they were all had folks. And when they sent us over there, I pulled together the leaders from the different places, and we trained them to work together in helping to do that. And there are photographs of Mandela, shaking my hand because we were able to transform that situation. Same thing in Nigeria. And you're looking at somebody right now who was kidnapped in Colombia by the FARC, and the others got killed.
Yeah, I should tell that story, actually. Back in 2003, I was getting an award from the ACLU, and I could invite anybody I wanted to the banquet. So I had Gene Patterson, and some of you know, and John Hope Franklin, and I invited Bernard. But at the last minute, he called me and said, I'm so sorry, I have to cancel. I have to go to Medellin in Colombia because 6 or 7 years ago, I was kidnapped with 6 or 7 other people who were Colombians. They let me go after the first day, right? They let you go 1 or 2 days, but they kept the others in captivity, and then the government tried to go in and save them, and they were all killed. And so Bernard had to go down to Colombia to console the families. And but as you once told me, you were doing nonviolent work in Colombia, even with the Broward County Sheriff's Department. They've taught them about nonviolence, so equal opportunity employer, I guess. Do we have time for one question, or I guess one more question?
In your book, you describe, Dr. Arsenault, how his family was not very thrilled about his actions at the beginning. It's like, oh boy, my kid's going off to college and getting in trouble, and how the university president was like, you guys focus on your studies, not on activism, kind of thing. I wonder, being a homeboy in Tampa, did you also get that as well from your family? Like, what are you doing getting in trouble? Why are you going to jail? Going to jail is for people who are, what was the quote in the book? People who are trashy or something like that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you get that as well from your family?
Yes, in part, my family admired what I was doing, but at the same time, they didn't want to see me get eliminated, So what happened, even when I went on the Freedom Rides,
Yeah.
John Lewis and I were getting ready to go, and we had sent out our applications to CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, and John was going to be 21 in February, and I wasn't going to be 21 until July of that year. And so I needed parental permission. So I sent the forms home to Tampa. I was in Nashville. So I sent them to Tampa, my father, and I hadn't heard anything. And I sent special delivery because, we had to hurry up and get registered if we were going to go on to Freedom Rides. And so I called Tampa, called my father, and I said, Daddy, I said, yeah. Did you get that letter I sent to you for the college and, the application thing and everything, because I was going to go on the Freedom Rides? And he said, oh, yes. He said, I did receive that. I said, oh, my goodness, I'm glad you got it. Could you just go ahead and sign it and send it back special delivery? My father said, you think I didn't read it? He said, I said, yeah, okay, sign it and send it back right away. And you know what he said? I'm not signing your death warrant. Yeah. So I couldn't go on with John Lewis on the ride that we planned to go, but we went later, and I don't want to take up too much time to talk about that, but I had to go when we decided out of Nashville. See, we didn't have to get permission from our families to go, and
Well, yeah.
that's how we were
Right.
able to go.
Thank you so much for being with us tonight and sharing.
Thank you.
Please give another round for Ray and Dr. Bernard Lafayette, please. Yes.
Okay, all right. And they have my book here too, so I'll
Yeah,
be
I
willing
know.
to
We
sign it.
appreciate you all so much for being here. There are books for sale in the back at the table, and Dr. Lafayette and Dr. Arsenault will be doing a signing at the table over there, so please allow them to get to their table over there, and we'll line everyone up for signing.